Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber and welcome back to Law and Crime Now. We have a jam-packed show for you. We're going to talk about the video surrounding the death of George Floyd that has gone absolutely viral. New updates in the Lori Vallow and Robert Durst cases. There's a new Netflix documentary about Jeffrey Epstein that has dropped today, and we're going to have an interview with the director of that. But before we get into anything, we have to start with the new developments in the AHMAUD Arbery shooting out of Georgia, a case that we've been following very closely. As you know, that this cell phone footage capturing this February killing was ultimately led to the arrests and charging of 3 individuals, the McMichaels, who've been charged with murder and aggravated assault. And last week, William Bryan, the man who recorded the video, was arrested and charged with murder and false imprisonment. But the story doesn't end there, because we've learned that the Department of Justice has launched their own investigation and have considered filing hate crime charges in this case, on top of the fact that the investigators and the people surrounding this whole case are being investigated for why it took so long, for 2 months, for charges to ultimately be brought. Now, I want to go back to when we listened to that GBI press conference, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We heard Director Vic Reynolds speak about the status of the GBI's investigation into possible misconduct. Here's what he had to say.
The question is what the status is regarding the investigation that we've been asked to do about potential prosecutorial misconduct. As you recall, we were asked by the Attorney General's office to conduct a separate and distinct investigation into that. The Bureau is doing that. I don't have a timeline on that, but I do anticipate it's not going to take us much longer to finish it. Once that's completed, what will procedurally happen is we will turn that file over to the Attorney General's office. They will be the deciding agency or entity in what, if anything, happens in that regard. Our agents, a separate team of agents, are conducting that investigation. And again, I don't have a definitive timeline, but I am confident in telling you that I don't anticipate it will be much longer until we're through with that.
All right, I'm joined right now by New York Law School professor, Professor Kirk Burkhalter, as well as Law and Crime's own Linda Kenney Baden and Brian Buckmire. It's great to have everybody here. Brian, I want to start with you. Can you tell us, what do we know about the status of these investigations by state and federal authorities? I mean, what do you think is going to happen here? Are they going to file hate crime charges? What do you think is going to happen?
I think at this point, Jesse, we're going to see more facts start to develop. What I think could happen, I don't know if this is going to be a hate crime as yet. The facts haven't led themselves there as yet. I do understand the dynamics of it being 3 white men chasing down a black male, but this seems to be more in line of them falsely believing he was a burglar rather than his race. However, we're also hearing information that might lead us to the fact that there might be some sort of hate-filled animus in these men prior to this. Now, some of it could be fake news, some of it could be correct, but depending on how that all lays out, could be the way that this hate crime investigation goes.
Professor, if federal hate crime charges are levied against the McMichaels, maybe even Mr. Bryan, are those tough to defend against? Are they tough to prosecute traditionally?
I would say that they are a little bit more difficult to prosecute. The reason being is that there must be some form of intentionality. And that's always the rub with hate crime charges and what makes them so difficult. So unless you have the smoking gun in the sense that someone was wearing some type of garb that states their hatred for a particular group, or they make a statement to that effect, it's difficult to prove. As Brian pointed out, while animus may it may seem to be apparent here, that's not enough to get past that hurdle. Hate crimes are intentional, and in most cases, there would have had to been some type of statement or clear evidence of animus against a particular group.
Well, I'll say, we know the GBI investigated. They looked into the McMichaels' home. Still don't know what they found in there, so maybe they are finding evidence and sharing it with federal authorities. We'll see. Linda, let me ask you this. If the McMichaels are hit with these really, really tough charges that carry even more significant punishment, does that give you a sense they might try to work out a plea deal? It's kind of a situation where somebody's hit with the highest crime. All right, maybe if you accept this, I'll go a little bit lower and admit to what I did.
Well, it's interesting, Jesse, because you would have 2 issues here because you have both the state prosecution, possibly, and the federal prosecution, correct? Even though they have been arrested, they haven't been indicted yet on either. So if you're going to say, I'm going to work out a deal with the feds, but you're still then going to face charges with the state, it's really hard given the fact that we have this sovereignty. That doesn't mean that it's double jeopardy. That means they could have deals in both situations, but both deals do not run concurrent, and therefore their time is huge.
Well, it's something interesting to think about. And look, I want to go back to William Bryan because he was arrested last week. Was it a shock to everybody? Did people expect it? There were calls for his arrest. And I'll go back to Vic Reynolds, once again, the director of the GBI, who said this to say about when it was time to ultimately arrest William Bryan.
Are you able to tell us what was the last straw that made you make this third arrest?
You know, I don't know if there was a proverbial last straw. I will tell you that in conducting an investigation, what I would ask folks to remember is that we don't go into the situation of this nature investigating a person or persons. We go in investigating a set of facts. And once we start turning stones over, sometimes there's one or two stones underneath there that need to be turned over. And once we reached a point, and it was probably sometime Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, when we began speaking with our folks there, that we reached the point in conjunction with the Cobb District Attorney's Office that we were convinced probable cause existed to make those charges. We proceeded to do that yesterday. It wasn't a proverbial last moment of epiphany or anything of that nature. It was just an accumulation of various things that were there and various things we discovered over the last 16 days. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bryan continuously said he was nothing more than a witness and did not know the McMichaels. Were you all able to determine that Mr. Bryan did know the McMichaels through any set of texts or conversations? Can you speak to how you determined those relationships?
I will say this, again, not to speak on the facts. They'll come out in a court of law, but I can tell you that if we believed he was a witness, we wouldn't have arrested him. So there's probable cause and we're comfortable with that. Yes, sir.
Brian, over to you. What was your reaction to the arrest of William Bryan? Because Kevin Goff, who's representing Bryan, he appeared on CNN, said his client bears no responsibility for the death of Arbery. He's completely innocent, committed no crime, looking forward to a speedy trial. Your reaction to that?
It made perfect sense to me, Jesse, for him to be arrested. I'm looking at the police report where Gregory McMichaels says that William Bryan, or it says Brody, which is his nickname, was a part of this chase and in fact tried to close off AHMAUD Arbery's escape. So therefore he's aiding and abetting or acting in concert, we might say, in New York. And then, as you say, in that CNN interview, that was, as a defense attorney, it was cringeworthy. I was shaking afterwards because I can't imagine how a defense attorney would put their client in that kind of light, answering some of the more mundane questions, but avoiding some of the larger ones that everyone wanted to know.
So, Professor, I mean, what are you looking out for next with Bryan? At this point, if you were representing him, what is the next steps? Because, look, we live in a COVID-19 era. A speedy trial might not be happening so quickly. What steps do you think his defense team are making at this point?
Well, what he needs to do is he's going to have to get his story straight. So let me first put on my police hat. As you know, as a detective here in New York for 20 years, first thing that hit my mind and always bothered me with him was, why were you here? It's not like he was in the middle of Times Square and happened to take his phone out. So there has to be a viable reason. Is this somewhere that you travel regularly? Or are you normally in this area? Why were you here at this particular time? And why did you spend so much time filming this crime? Don't forget that this trial will take place in front of a jury. So there are certain standards of proof that have to be adhered to, but ultimately he's going to be judged by 12 men and women of his peers. So I think that's the largest hurdle. I think the statement that he attempted to block the victim's path with his car is really going to hurt him. Don't know how he's going to get over that. I would suspect, like many defendants do, he might backtrack over some of these statements, because obviously he wasn't arrested initially at the time of the incident. It took a couple of months, and then after video surfaced. So I would suspect we might see him backtrack a little bit on his stories, because after all, none of these statements were made under oath. But I do think it'll be a little bit difficult for him, given that he's charged with attempted false imprisonment, and that's what led to the felony murder charge.
Exactly right. That false imprisonment led to the death of Arbery, felony murder. Linda, going to ask you again about a deal. You know, they talked about him being such an important witness, could he be the state's star witness? Could he take a deal and testify against the McMichaels? We have about 40 seconds, Linda.
I am smelling DEAL. That's why his attorney went on that interview. It didn't obviously to say he's not guilty, but obviously to set him up to say, I have this information. Here's my poor guy. He doesn't have an education, says his attorney. So government, come let him testify. Give this poor guy a deal.
And we'll have to see what happens. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Arbery case and also focus on the George Floyd death. We'll be right back.